Can Embraer actually compete with Boeing and Airbus? Because on paper it sounds impossible. Two corporate giants with a century of experience, worldwide supply chains, and thousands of aircraft in service versus a Brazilian company best known for the 76-seat regional jets. Commercial aviation is facing a problem that almost no one wants to discuss. Airbus can't build aircraft fast enough, and Boeing is still firefighting crisis after crisis. And airlines, desperate for new jets and stuck in the middle, are now faced with a staggering order backlog of 8,000 aircraft that stretches to 2032. The industry is highlighting a pressing need: a viable new competitor. Enter 2025, when one unexpected name raised its head: Embraer. A company famous for operating 70 to 130-seat regional jets and controlling around 80% of the 76-seat regional market in the United States, is now considering a bold leap into the mainline market with a 240-seat single-aisle airliner. If this move unfolds, Embraer could disrupt the industry that's gotten used to just two choices. The initial impact could be felt on busy regional routes such as those from New York to Chicago or London to Frankfurt, where high frequency and seat capacity is paramount. Additionally, emerging markets in South America and Southeast Asia, which are ripe for new aircraft options due to the increased air travel demand, might also experience significant change. However, before we can determine whether or not Embraer can actually achieve this lofty goal, we need to examine how Boeing and Airbus became so large, and why breaking the duopoly is one of the hardest challenges in aviation. Today, approximately 80% of all commercial jets are manufactured by just two companies. A near monopoly created by historical dominance, political will, and a market that has resisted new challenges for decades. Well, perhaps until now, because while Boeing and Airbus fight at the top, something has been rising quietly beneath them. A company from Brazil, Embraer, that had established itself by succeeding in regional jets and now stands poised as a possible contender to challenge the current leaders. And now, it might be ready for them to think bigger. Embraer was founded in 1969 as a state-owned enterprise, part of Brazil's ambition to build a modern aerospace industry. Unlike Boeing or Airbus, Embraer didn't begin with big jets. It began with rugged, practical aircraft for a developing nation. The EMB-110, turboprop, military trainers like the Tucano, and specialized aircraft for short, undeveloped runways. The company served Brazil's needs first and the world's second. For decades, Embraer wasn't even on Boeing or Airbus's radar. But then, everything changed. In 1994, Embraer was privatized. And suddenly, freed from government bureaucracy, it began to reinvent itself almost overnight. The goal wasn't to compete with Boeing or Airbus. That would have been suicide for a newly private company. Rather, Embraer looked for a gap in the market, a segment that the big players had up till then ignored. And they found one. In the early 2000s, airlines began to shift away from large aircraft flying between major hubs and towards smaller jets that offered a strategic pivot, enabling point-to-point flying that trimmed total trip times and enhanced passenger value. This approach allowed airlines to connect regional cities directly, bypassing the need for time-consuming transfers through major airports, which in turn improved customer satisfaction and operational efficiency. But they needed smaller jets that could connect hundreds of regional cities directly. Boeing and Airbus didn't care about this market, and Bombardier was focused on turboprops. So this was a perfect opportunity. So in 2004, Embraer introduced the E-Jet family, a clean sheet design in the 70 to 130 seat range, and airlines loved them. Passengers loved them even more. E-Jets felt like a mini A320 rather than a cramped regional plane, with 2x2 seating, decent overhead bins, quiet, efficient engines, and the timing could have not been better. Within a decade, E-Jets were everywhere. In North America, Embraer pulled off something extraordinary. Now, thanks to US pilot union scope clauses, airlines needed an aircraft under 76 seats and below a certain weight limit to pay the regional pilots less. And the Embraer E175 fit that perfectly. And that's why Embraer was able to scoop up the entire of the 76-seat mark. And now they've delivered over 1,800 E-jets. Needless to say, Embraer dominated this niche, and they would become the world's third largest aircraft manufacturer without ever building anything bigger than 130 seats. It was a smart, disciplined strategy that focused on profitability over risky expansion, and for 30 years it worked. But as I've said, the world is changing and the duopoly is strained. Airlines are desperate and industry disruption is looming. It's finally time to ask, can a third major player emerge and reshape the industry's future, finally giving airlines a competitive alternative to Boeing and Airbus? Consider this, by the time we get to 2030, a new narrow-body aircraft is expected to exceed 12,000 planes. This signals a tectonic shift in aviation dynamics. All those Boeing 737 and Airbus A320s that we currently have flying today will begin to retire, so we need thousands of new aircraft to keep the industry going at the same time. However, this tale has been told before by a company in the north, in Canada. In the late 2000s, Bombardier, Embraer's biggest rival in the regional aircraft space, decided to leapfrog into the mainline market, not with a slightly bigger regional jet, but with a brand new clean sheet 110 to 150 seat airliner, the C Series. I love this aircraft. It's bold, it's risky, and it's brilliant. The C Series was lighter, quieter, and far more fuel efficient than the older Boeing 737s and the Airbus A319s it was designed to replace. Early flight tests showed it was a genuine threat, especially to the lower end of Boeing's brand new 737 MAX lineup. And Boeing took this very seriously. So seriously that they filed a trade complaint accusing Bombardier of selling aircraft at unfair low prices, dumping the aircraft to Delta to get into the market, and this triggered a massive industry fight. In 2018, with Bombardier struggling financially and unable to scale their production, Airbus made a move that shocked the entire industry and bought a 50.01% stake in the C Series for virtually nothing. And overnight, the C Series became the Airbus A220. And this brand new Airbus A220 directly threatened the 737 MAX 7. Well, that's what Boeing says, but actually this jet was never really meant to compete that much with Boeing, but Boeing's plan to cut off Bombardier ended up just giving Airbus a ladder into the market. So to counter the Airbus A220 coming into their marketplace, Boeing would actually speak to Embraer and ask if they would like to take over their commercial division. In 2018, it announced a plan to acquire 80% of Embraer's commercial division, and on paper this made perfect sense. Boeing would gain a strong lineup below the 737 to stop Airbus's ideas of expanding the A220, and Embraer would gain Boeing's marketing, supply chain, and global reach. Together, they would match Airbus's Plus A220 series, blow for blow. For Embraer, this was a huge moment. The company had never been closer to joining the top tier of aviation, but then everything collapsed. After two tragic crashes, the 737 MAX was grounded worldwide. Billions in losses followed and production collapsed. Airlines cancelled orders and Boeing faced its worst crisis in history. And during the chaos, Boeing tried to walk away from the Embraer deal. In April 2020, Boeing officially terminated the agreement, leaving Embraer furious. They would launch legal action against Boeing, and the two companies would eventually settle in 2024 for around $150 million. But the real problem was that the strategic partnership was dead. And that left Embraer standing alone right as Airbus began pulling even further ahead with their Airbus 220. But here's the funny thing. With Boeing scrambling to complete its current orders and to deal with the MAX crisis, and Airbus so bloated with attention that they can't possibly deliver any of these aircraft anytime soon, remember there's a backlog of 8,000 aircraft, this leaves a gap in the market. And if there's one company that's good at finding gaps, it's Embraer. And they're starting to rethink their future, not as a regional specialist, but as a true mainline jet manufacturer. Now, Embraer is no stranger to new aircraft. Embraer was actually betting on a different kind of project, a new generation turboprop. What started in 2019 as a modest 50 to 70 seat concept gradually evolved into a 70-100 seat family, sharing the same cross-section as the E-jets, but with modern turboprop engines and far lower fuel burn than the aging ATRs and Dash 8s. By 21, Embraer was showing off a bold new configuration with quieter, aft-mounted engines, targeting a 2022 launch and a 2028 entry into service, and forecasted a demand of more than 2,000 jets over 20 years. On paper, it looked like a license to print money, but CEO Francisco Gomez Neto quietly confirmed on an earnings call that the turboprop program had been cancelled as the company chose to focus its limited engineering resources on its current lineup and other new high-priority projects. In other words, even a promising turboprop couldn't survive once the possibility of a larger narrowbody entered the conversation. Then in June of 2024, Embraer quietly admitted that it was actually exploring a larger narrowbody concept, but insisted that it had no concrete plans and was focusing on just ramping up E2 production. By mid-2025, that language had shifted. R&D spending was up and executives were openly talking about a new narrowbody design in the conceptual phase. Then, on November 6, 2025, industry outlet Leham News confirmed what had only been rumored. Embraer is studying a brand new 180 to 240 seat single-aisle aircraft. This would be the largest aircraft Embraer has ever built. A clean sheet jet targeting not only the Airbus A320 but also the 737 MAX. In other words, the heart of the global airliner market. This would be Embraer's moonshot. One of the big unanswered questions is where exactly Embraer wants this aircraft to sit on the map, because that seat selection was quite a range. On one end, it could be a straight competitor to Boeing and Airbus's offering, optimized for short-haul and medium-haul routes, flying the same missions airlines already know. On the other hand, it could creep into a true middle-of-the-market territory, be closer to the old Boeing 757 aimed at long, thin routes that are too small for a 787 or Airbus A330, but too far for a standard narrowbody. Although the warning is that Embraer can't be all things to all people. The company has confirmed the study publicly, but stressed it has not launched a program. It's still in the earliest feasibility phase. Internally, the debates are intense. This move represents a seismic philosophical shift. For decades, Embraer's leadership repeated the same message, that they won't compete above 150 seats, and that was a core part of the company's identity. The E2 family was designed specifically not to challenge Boeing and Airbus head-on, and Embraer was to be a specialist, not a giant. But this really is a test of whether or not Embraer can scale up and truly compete with the giants. A potential E3 project is drawing real interest from industry insiders, suppliers, and airlines watching closely. Industry headlines have called it the biggest gamble in Embraer's history, a move that could either carve out a new market or stretch the company dangerously thin. But everyone agrees on one thing: the world needs this new narrowbody aircraft, and they need a lot of them yesterday. If Embraer was to launch their program now, it could enter service right when the airlines need replacements for their aging fleets. And we know that Airbus is full until the 2030s, and Boeing is behind schedule and struggling to recover. Just look at their 777X program. We know that the Chinese C9119 doesn't have broad global certification, and Russia's MC21 is politically stuck. So Embraer has a window, a rare one in this industry, where even a small player could get a meaningful slice of the market. They wouldn't be defeating Boeing or Airbus, but by complementing them, offering the alternative airlines have sought for years. And that brings us back to the central question: can Embraer actually compete with Boeing and Airbus? Because on paper it sounds impossible. Two corporate giants with a century of experience, worldwide supply chains, and thousands of aircraft in service versus a Brazilian company best known for the 76-seat regional jets. To best answer this, whether or not Embraer can truly compete, we need to break this down into three parts. The first part is, what advantages does Embraer have in the industry? Then what challenges stand in their way? And what exactly does the market desperately need right now? Because the answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's actually far more interesting. Despite being much smaller, Embraer has some unique strengths that Boeing and Airbus don't have right now. The first is the ability to create a clean sheet aircraft, or clean sheet freedom. Boeing is stuck with the 737 airframe, and Airbus is tied to the A320 structure. Both of these were designed in the 1960s and 1980s respectively. A new Embraer narrowbody could be built with an all-new fuselage, a wider cabin, modern materials, next-generation engines, and optimized aerodynamics. And if any of you have flown on the Airbus A220, you know how refreshing it is to get on board and see the brighter interior, bigger windows, and toilets with a view. So with Embraer, they could be creating a plane that is 10 to 20% more efficient right out of the gate. And this is something that Airbus and Boeing can't do quickly, not without billions in retooling and a long painful transition. Embraer also has a much leaner business and culture. It's not weighed down by legacy systems and a sprawling, decades-old production lines, or executives in Chicago. They run small programs, they innovate quickly, and they've built an aircraft family, the E-Jets, with excellent reliability and reputation. And then there's the production capacity. Airbus is full and Boeing is struggling, so a third supplier with fresh availability production slots would be extremely attractive to airlines. I know I've said that 3 times in this video, but I really do need to hammer that that's the main point. And finally, Embraer has the reputation for designing the right-sized jet. Its regional jets have become global hits because it solved real operational problems. A new 180 to 240-seat jet designed with the same philosophy would be very appealing. But Embraer also faces enormous obstacles, the kind that can kill an aircraft before they even fly. A clean sheet narrow-body aircraft isn't just an engineering challenge, it's a financial one. The development costs for such a project can vary widely, with the best-case scenarios estimating around $10 billion, whilst the worst case could see the costs exceeding $20 billion. This range highlights the financial precipice Embraer stands on, where even minor deviations of expenditure could have significant impacts over their entire company. That is borderline unthinkable for Embraer's balance sheet, considering that this program would be more than the company's worth, around $11 billion. Without the government's support or a major partnership, it would be financially ruinous. And then there's also scaling. Building a 240-seat aircraft is on an entirely different scale than building a regional jet. Embraer will need new factories, new suppliers, and new global service infrastructure, as well as new training programs, certification pathways, and a massive increase in a skilled workforce. This is a generational leap, not an incremental one. Of course, all of this assumes that there are actually engines to hang onto the wings. That's also another real choke point, because in global production today, it's not just airframes that are behind, it's also the engines. Pratt & Whitney, CFM, Rolls-Royce, and the rest are already struggling to keep up with demand for the Airbus A320neo and the 737 MAX. Even Embraer builds a brilliant airframe, it will still be fighting Airbus and Boeing for slots on the same engine production lines, and the big two will always be the first in the queue. I also need to touch on airline trust. Airlines love the E175 and the E190, but trusting Embraer with a mainline jet, something that could become 20 or 30% of their entire fleet, is a very different risk. For airlines, that matters because adding a brand new type isn't just a purchase, it's a lifetime commitment. A new jet means new type ratings and simulators for pilots, fresh training pipelines for cabin crew, as well as new maintenance procedures and spare parts. All of that complexity costs millions before the first paying passenger ever boards. So unless Embraer can offer a step change in economics or a very attractive sticker price, many carriers will simply decide that it's easier to keep buying more of what they already have than trying something new. Because we saw that with the Russian Superjet 100, that whilst got to Mexico, didn't last very long in the international stage. Airbus and Boeing can offer bulk order discounts, global maintenance networks, and decades of operational data, and roughly guaranteed delivery pipelines. Lastly, if Embraer steps into their territory, it won't be a friendly fight. Imagine a large Brazilian-built narrowbody would be trying to break into the United States and Europe, two of the most fiercely defended aviation markets on Earth, where the incumbents, Boeing and Airbus, employ tens of thousands of people. Trade disputes, tariffs, and behind-the-scenes lobbying could easily become as big an obstacle as aerodynamics or fuel burn. Embraer already has seen how quickly a promising partnership with Boeing can evaporate once politics enters the chat, and we could see that happen again. Airbus and Boeing have also historically fought off competitors with aggressive pricing. If Embraer enters the mainline market, expect heavy discounts, aggressive sales campaigns, and lobbying pressure, as well as supply chain poaching. So, can Embraer compete? Well, today, no. The company is not yet capable of building and supporting an Airbus A320 or 737 rival at scale. But in the next decade? Possibly. If Embraer partners with another nation, another OEM, or secures major funding, if they design a clean sheet jet that is meaningfully more efficient than the Airbus A320 or the MAX, and if it times the aircraft to enter service right as airlines replace their aging fleets, then yes, Embraer could become the first company in 50 years to seriously challenge the duopoly. Not dethrone it, not take half of the market, but become something airlines desperately need: a reliable third supplier. And if that happens, it wouldn't just jolt Boeing and Airbus, it would give airlines a real leverage for the first time in decades. More competition on price, more flexibility on deliveries, and a genuine alternative for carriers in developing regions that struggle to place big orders with the expensive giants. And over time, a stable tripoli of Airbus, Boeing, and Embraer could fundamentally change the aviation economics, lower prices, and create faster innovation and a more resilient supply chain. Because in the end, it isn't just about designing a new airplane, it's about reshaping the entire future of global aviation. And if Embraer does take that leap, maybe it will make flying cheaper for all of us.